Hello everyone and welcome back to the Damage Counter YouTube channel. Here bringing y'all a tournament report for the North America International Championships for 2023. Incidentally, the last tournament report I produced on the channel was for last year's NAIC. So despite playing all season, I apologize for not getting any tournament reports out until now, but I figured, this is the big one, biggest tournament of the year and certainly one of my favorites. So I figured if I was going to do a tournament report, it had to be for this event, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So for this event, I played Rapid Strike Inteleon Urshifu. Pretty good meta call for the event. It did end up winning the entire tournament in the Masters division, of course, piloted by Cyrus Davis. My list looks a lot different, as you can see. Not really playing a lot of the same cards, had a few different ideologies here. And in all honesty, this is just a straight-up net deck from Omnipoke. About a week or so before the event, they put out a top 10 decks for NAIC video, and this was the list they had for Inteleon Urshifu. So I decided to just take this and run with it. It's definitely geared more towards consistency, because one of my biggest problems with this archetype in the previous format is that oftentimes you just kind of lost to your opening hand. Sometimes you'd be clunked up with a bunch of supporters or a bunch of evolutions or energy or something, like a bunch of unplayable cards in hand, and then you just kind of lose to your opening turns a lot of times. So I like that this deck was geared more towards consistency. We've got the 4 research, 2 Iono, and the Squawkabilly EX with its Squawk and Seize ability. On the first turn of the game, you can use that ability, discard your hand, and then draw 6. This basically ensures that more often than not, you're not going to be losing to your opening hand because Squawk lets you see those extra 6 cards on your first turn of the game, which is really good, right? So helps you dig a little bit for those Battle VIP pass, helps you see more basic Pokemon, so you can get set up, because this is kind of like a setup combo type deck. You have a bunch of essentially stage 1s that you need to get into play as quickly as possible, or at least as quick as you can, in order to maximize the synergy across your Pokemon here. But outside of that, I mean, it is fairly standard for an Inteleon Urshifu deck. You're using the Double Gunner on the Inteleon VMAX, the Painful Spoons on the Radiant Alakazam to create damage on the board, damage counters, move them around, manipulate the damage, and then having all of that culminate in an extra turn with the Yoga Loop attack from the Metacham V, and topping it off with a G-Max Rapid Flow to really, really destroy your opponent's board. So all the cards in here are kind of trying to help you do that. Outside of your consistency for Research and Iono, you have your Melanie, so you can get some energy out of the discard pile, so you can go back-to-back Rapid Flows in certain scenarios. Energy retrievals to get back basic energies that you discard off of Double Gunner, so you can keep using the ability. Forest Healstone, so you have some kind of V-Star power to work with. Again, this is a pretty big setup combo type deck, so being able to search your deck for 1 card once per game, pretty solid stuff. Of course, the Echoing Horn to bring back weak basic Pokemon for you to score an extra prize card or 2, depending on the situation. All pretty standard stuff. Only other thing I want to highlight here is the one-of copy of Spiritomb. I'm a big baby. I don't like to leave certain matchups unanswered if I can help it. So I played the Spiritomb as it was kind of an attempt to catch all for like Lugia and for Mew. I think Spiritomb works really well in like Arceus decks, but if you're trying to counter Mew, like if you're going to play this deck and you're specifically worried about Mew, well, either A, don't play this deck, or B, go with Drapion instead. I think for this deck specifically, Drapion is just a much better counter. Because while the Spiritomb is nice, you can slow down the Mew, you can stop them from drawing cards for a little bit. The moment they attach a Fusion Strike energy to even just one Genesect, or the moment they pull an Elisa Sparkle or a Forest Sealstone, Fusion Strike energy comes out onto the Genesect, they're drawing cards again, and you just don't deal enough damage between the Inteleon and the Urshifu to really take advantage of the fact that you're slowing them down with Spiritomb. So if you're wanting, if you're looking for an answer for Mew, I think in this deck it has to be Drapion, which allows you to take 3 prize cards against the Mew, and then you can clean up the game with like 2 prize cards off of a Genesect and then like a Rapid Flow of Meloetta or something like that. I think it gives you a more solid game plan into Mew than Spiritomb, but that's neither here nor there. Spiritomb is extremely handy for the Lugia matchup, however, which even with Spiritomb, that matchup is still pretty bad, but being able to slow them down by denying them use of Luminion V is a pretty strong strategy. Prevents them from getting the supporters they need to actually get Archeops in the discard pile, or even just prevents like extremely aggressive Boss's Orders plays that they like to do in the mid to late game. It certainly does help out in the matchup, but it's still a pretty bad matchup, all things considered, at the end of the day. Just because, again, like they play V-Guard energy, your damage output is relatively low as it is, and the Lugia has resistance on the Urshifu, so it gets a little bit dicey here and there. If I had to do the whole event over, honestly, I would just choose to disrespect Mew and Lugia in general. I kind of, like I said, I'm a baby. I don't like to leave certain matchups unanswered if I can help it. And for this event specifically, I think it would have made a world of difference. Just one final note is that the Spiritomb could also, in theory, be used to stop Gardevoir players from using Roar of the Sword, which under certain circumstances can be an annoying play. Like if they have a Zacian on the bench and go turn 1 attach Roar of the Sword. That can be pretty difficult to deal with because you're not playing Boss's Orders in the deck, right? So you can't just bring it up and hit it to prevent it from getting to the one-shot numbers. You just kind of like, you know, they attach those energies for free without damaging themselves, and you're just kind of like, what do I do? So Spiritomb, not a completely worthless card, but I think for this event specifically, this could have been like an extra consistency spot, or we could have found room for the Clara or the Cheryl here. Hard to say either way, but overall the list wasn't bad. It ran pretty consistently. Actually, I don't really think I bricked at all. Like all of my starts were pretty good thanks to Squawk and the high counts of research. And overall, I like got into the game and like wanted to do what I wanted to do. So overall, I think it's pretty successful. On to matchups. I only went 4-3-2 on the day, so unfortunately did not make day 2 at this event. Round 1, of all things, we started with the Mirror, which got a laugh out of me. Mirror is pretty interesting, because if both players don't brick, then like, it's just damage counters everywhere, who can get the Yoga Loop off first. I mean, it's like, I mean, obviously it's even because it's a mirror match, but like, as far as mirror matches go, I think this is about as even as it gets, as long as neither player bricks. And I was in a position to win game 3 in turns, but my opponent was playing the Cheryl. So I had a 6 prize turn lined up with Rapid Flow, and the last turn of turns, or my opponent's last turn of turns, they dropped the Cheryl and removed the play, and at that point, the only thing I could do was tie, so a bit unfortunate there, but nothing to be too upset about. Rounds 2, 3, and 4 hit some pretty favorable matchups. As you can see, I hit a lot of Gardevoir over the weekend, which is part of the reason why I wanted to play this deck, right? It was a really good meta call. We knew that Gardevoir and the Lost Zone box were going to make up, in my prediction, at the very least, was like 35% of the metagame, and I think it landed at right about that, if not a little bit more. So when you think about it, going into a round and you have a 35% chance to hit 2 extremely favorable matchups, and roughly a 20% chance to hit like Mew or Lugia, which are your unfavorable matchups, and then the rest of the field is like, you don't care. And especially considering that a lot of the field, especially at the upper tables, was like Arceus, that was just even more matchups that was favorable for you, so this is just a really good meta call for the weekend. Round 2 hit the Gardevoir. Pretty favorable matchup. You get the guns out, you start blasting out the little baby Ralts. You know, they got 60, 70 HP. Pretty easy to set them up for a Yoga Loop, and especially if the Gardevoir player takes the risk on benching Mew as well, is an even easier Yoga Loop target. Of course, the Manaphy can't survive the combo either, making them open to Rapid Flow. So had a pretty dominating game 1, and then game 2, my opponent started Cresselia attach pass, and I just had the most bonkers setup of my life. So Pretty quick round there. Round 3, played against the Qian Pao Baxcalibur. This one can be a little scary. The Qian Pao can just can get to VMAX numbers pretty easily with Hailblade, which makes this matchup a little scary if you can't stop them from setting up. But thankfully I was able to do just that in round 3. It was a good game. My opponent, I could tell, was a little bit newer. I think they told me that this was like their second or third tournament. So they were a little bit newer, but nothing wrong with that. You got to start somewhere. So thankfully was able to take out his little Frigibacks before they evolved. So managed to clean that one up pretty easy. Round 4, hit another Gardevoir. Same verse, second as the first. Just prevented them from setting up. It got to a point where they just I think it was either game 1 or game 2, they just did not get a single EX into play, and they just had to scoop it up. So pretty dominating games there. Round 5 is where I took my first loss, so I started the day with 301, which is my best start at a Premier event just in general. I think that's the actually not even I think, I know for a fact that that's the strongest start I've ever had at a regional or an IC, so I feel pretty good about that, but unfortunately the rest of the day kind of trends downwards from here, as you can see. We started with a loss in round 5 to a Gardevoir player. And while this is a favorable matchup, sometimes things don't really go your way. I remember game 2, I had some pretty bad prize cards. I had to discard an Inteleon VMAX early, and another one was in the prize, and I just could never get to it. So that was pretty unfortunate. But my opponent also, I could tell, had tested the matchup. They knew what they were doing. And this is why I brought up the Zacian, or the whole thing with Zacian V earlier when talking about Spiritomb, because, he had a Zacian V on the bench and went Attach Roar of the Sword game 1, and I didn't really know how to handle it. And he was able to get his Zacian set up with enough energy to start OHKOing VMAX Pokemon without, while keeping it out of range of, Yoga Loops or Double Gunner KOs. So that felt pretty bad. Didn't really know what to do in that situation, unfortunately. I hadn't really tested that line of play, or that was a line of play I'd never really considered. So unfortunately took the L there. And, like I said, we started on a downtrend. We took 1 L, and then we ran into Lugia, which I mentioned before. Lugia is one of your worst matchups, especially the single strike variant, because, not only do you have to deal with the fact that Archeops just in and of itself is kind of annoying to KO because you need to double gunner it twice before you can rapid flow, and then by the time you get there, they're kind of already set up, so it's you have to balance, does that matter right now, or should I just start trying to whittle out these 2 prizers? It gets really weird. And then they, again, they have the V-Guard energy, the Lugia is resistant, and Tyranitar V, it has 230 HP, it's so big! And, again, your damage output in this deck is relatively low, oftentimes relying on those combo plays and taking out the little baby Pokemon, which Lugia doesn't play. So that's a really tough matchup. I was luckily able to squeeze out a tie at the very least. I did manage to get a turn 1 donk, or not a turn 1 donk, but I took out his Lugia turn 2, his lone Lugia V turn 2. Game 1 was really funny. Hit it with Surf turn 1 on the Inteleon V, and then next turn, he retreated it to the bench to protect it because he missed a V-Star, and then I just went double gunner, escape rope, knockout. So knocked out his only Lugia V. It was very funny. But unfortunately ended in a tie there. So from here on out, at this point, after round 6, I had to win out to make day 2. Unfortunately didn't get there. Round 7, hit another Gardevoir and took the loss. This Gardevoir player is notable. It was Takedo Seki, one of the best players in Japan. If y'all would recall at OCIC, this was the player that brought that very interesting, what I like to call Lugia control. It played the Lugia V-Star with the celebrations of Eltal and Heavy Drapion. So trying to take the control elements to defeat opposing Lugia and Mew, which is a really interesting approach. He was the one that made that deck, so it got paired into him round 7. Again, one of the best players in Japan. We had a really good series. Game 3 went to turns, and I had game in hand going in. So I was turn 0, and at the end of turn 0, I had game in hand. I just needed to survive that one turn. But then he he Shining Arcana'd into Reversal Energy and was able to take out my Inteleon VMAX with the Gardevoir, securing him that game 3. So an unfortunate end to the run, but I mean, again, one of the world's best, one of Japan's best. If that's how my day 2 run ends, I think I can I think I can be pretty proud about that, especially since the games were just so close in general. So it was a really good series. Round 8, I got paired into Colorless Lugia. Again, it's just not a good matchup. It's not like... Yeah, I mean, this matchup's just so bad because you can't even, like, set up the Snorlax for Yoga Loop plays because the Unfazed Fat protects it from Yoga Loop damage. So you can't even Yoga Loop the Snorlax, which just feels so bad. So yeah, I mean, that's a pretty bad matchup. But also at that point, like, I've got this bad habit of, like, when I go to regionals and stuff, that, like, once I'm out of contention for day 2, I just kind of lose motivation to play well. Like, I'm just at the point like, okay, well, I don't make day 2, so I don't care anymore. So, and I'm not trying to make excuses for myself here. My opponent was playing quite well despite being unfamiliar with the matchup. He was quite honest with me about that. But despite being unfamiliar with the matchup, he played it really well. And it's just one of those things. It's a bad matchup, and there just wasn't really much I could do. So I just took the L there. I was like, all right, man, it is what it is. Round 9, though, managed to end the day on the win, at the very least. Hit another Chien-Pao Baxcalibur, and, just like round 3, was able to get a solid setup in thanks to Squawkabilly, and, just deny the Frigibacks and set up the combos when I needed to close out the game. So, overall, 4-3-2, I'm not really all that thrilled about that finish, especially coming off of my first top 256 at Milwaukee. Was hoping to do a little bit better at this event, but it is what it is at the end of the day. For a deck that I picked up just a week before NAIC, I think things went relatively okay. But that leads me into what went wrong. So the big thing is, really it was my preparation before the event that really hindered my performance this weekend, I think. Because I feel like my play was pretty strong all 9 rounds. Like, I think I was more often than not at a pretty good ratio, like making the correct plays a lot of times. Which, with a deck like this, can be a little bit difficult sometimes. So I feel like my play was really strong throughout the 9 rounds. But again, it just came down to preparation. Like I mentioned in that round 5 against the Guardy where I took my first loss, my opponent went Attach, Roar, the Sword to Zacian, and I was like, I don't know how to respond to this. My other opponents didn't do this. Like, they just kept benching the Ralts, and I took advantage of that, right? So, because I didn't get the chance to really, like, test as much as I wanted with this archetype specifically, that's just a line of play that I had never considered, that I'd never been exposed to, and I didn't know how to handle it. And I think things like that are the reason why I kind of didn't do so well this event. And, to further on that, I didn't even test against Lugia at all. Like, it's one of those things, like, I just, and this is a personal thing, and I need to really get past this personally, but, like, I need to get past the fact that, like, I hate Lugia. I don't ever want to play against it. I don't want to play it. I don't want to see it. Just looking at it, I hate this deck so much. So that was part of the reason I didn't test it. I was like, I just don't want to test it, man. But I think there would have been merit to test it, because while it is a bad matchup, it's not, like, a downright unwinnable matchup like it is for Mew if you don't tech for it, right? Like, I think Lugia naturally, well, most of the time you're going to lose, that's probably like 60-40, maybe even 65-35 maybe. There are still outs to win, and I should have tested that more, so I think that would have helped out a lot. Like I said, I decided on the deck a week out from the tournament, which is not inherently a bad thing. I've actually done this for a lot of regionals, actually. I try not to do that, but it just kind of comes down that way a lot of times. I was testing a lot of things for this event, and nothing just really felt good. Like, I tried Arceus variants, which was a good meta call for the weekend, but I just wasn't, like, for the first time in a long time, I just wasn't feeling Arceus. Like, it just didn't feel good to me for this event. I tested Reversal Guardy, I tested Lost Zone variants, specifically Lost Zone Giratina. And I tested a bunch of like off the wall stuff too, because that's just the kind of player that I am. And none of it was sticking, so I ended up landing on Urshifu the week before the event, which again, not inherently a bad thing, but like when you only have a week like that, like you really need to dedicate that entire week to like aggressive testing and finding those lines of play that you think might be troubling, which for this event, I just kind of didn't do that because I was pretty discouraged during that week of testing because like Urshifu was kind of like the last chance saloon for me. You know, nothing in my testing was working to that point. I was on a mad losing streak for like 2 months in my testing. Just nothing was working. So I actually landed on the deck the same way Cyrus did. I went on Limitless and I just cycled by win percent. I saw Urshifu and I was like, you know what? I like Rapid Strike. I'll just play it and I'll just try it. Ended up having a lot of fun with the deck. I find the deck to be very fun, so that was kind of nice. But you know, after like my testing for 2 months just not going so well, I was just not at all encouraged to play. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses for myself here, but it's just a reality of the situation. I was just completely discouraged. You know, a week before the event, I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to pick up Inteleon. I'm going to ride off of my player skill. I'm going to just go with the flow, and I'm just going to see what happens. So it just kind of is what it is. Again, didn't test as many key matchups as I probably should have. And to that point, it's probably a good thing I didn't run into any Lost Box because while that's a favorable matchup and I've played it before and I'm kind of familiar with it, you know, I think playing around the Raikou is like the hard part of that matchup. And for that reason, I would much rather get paired into Gardevoir than I would Lost Box, just for that reason, because it's like they can just burst a Raikou out of nowhere and then like suddenly you might lose 3 prize cards. Whereas with Gardevoir, you know, everything they have is out on the board, right? So you can see, oh, they don't have any rolls, good. I don't have to worry about like an EX coming out of nowhere, you know? So it's one of those things. And I think the final thing is I got a little too in my head about a 301 start. And not in like a arrogant kind of way, but in a, oh my God, I'm freaking out kind of way. Because again, that's the best start I've ever had at a premier event. And this has always happened without fail. Anytime I go to like 5Ks or 1Ks or, you know, regionals, ICs, it doesn't matter. Like any kind of big tournament, if I have like a really good start, like I get in my head like, oh my God, I'm 301. I just need to win 3 more games and I can make day 2. This is it. This is the run. And I kind of get a little, you know, I kind of get that little hopeful thinking of like, oh my God, this is it. This could be the one. Instead of just being like, okay, you know, next up is round 5, just another game of Pokemon. Let's do it. Because I do remember in round 5 being a little bit distracted, like, I'm 301 right now. Like, this is crazy. This is so cool. And then, like, losing that first game 1, I'm like, oh no, here we go. I'm going to lose. So, kind of need to work on that, you know, mid-tournament mental game and, you know, just go from there. But I don't want to end the video on a sour note, so we'll balance things out with a few things that went right. Like I said before, Inteleon Urshifu was just an incredibly strong meta call. Again, Lost Zone Box and Gardevoir made up roughly 35%, if not more, of the day 1 metagame, which is pretty good. And with your unfavorable matchups, hitting around roughly 20%. Like I said, the numbers just work so good. And again, Arceus was also seeing a lot of play, especially at the upper table, so that, you know, you take that 35% of favorable matchups from Guardian Lost Box and you add however many percentage of Arceus players there was, you lump that on top of it. And if you want to take it an extra step further, personally, I think the Chen Pao matchup is pretty favorable, so that's an extra 7% on top of that, right? So, you know, Inteleon Urshifu's matchup spread for this weekend was just absurdly strong. Second, I played a deck that was fun, and I think that's a big deal, and I think, you know, a lot of people get like caught up in the act of metagaming, like, oh, I gotta play the, you know, what's the call for this event? I gotta play the best deck for this event, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, that was something I tried to do a lot this season, especially in the later half after Silver Tempest. But I think, and this is a player dependent thing for sure, but I think for somebody like me, I think even though it may not be the best call for the event, which in this case it was, but even if it's like not, you know, the play for the event, I think if I'm playing a deck that I think is fun, and, you know, if a deck is fun, I'm naturally going to be more familiar with it because I enjoy playing it. I think I just, like, naturally perform better It's just kind of one of those like mental tick things for me is like, I have to play a deck that's fun. It's just why I didn't play Lugia at any regionals during like the Silver Tempest format. I tried. I did test some Lugia, and I was genuinely going to play it for Knoxville, but like just in testing and at locals, I kept playing it. I was like, I hate this deck. I'm not having fun. It's so stupid. So I think for a player like me, like playing a deck that's fun, like makes a huge difference. It makes a world of difference. So, definitely something that I would say went right for me there. Also, for once, I played a deck that was geared more towards consistency. A lot of times, those that have listened to the podcast or even follow me on Twitter, y'all know I love my like pile decks. I did play a lot of Sylveon Arceus, which is just one of the biggest arc piles I've ever seen in my life. And I love having like the little tech cards, like, oh yeah, I got this hot spice for the, for this matchup, and this card is so sick into this matchup, and blah 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 blah. I love having the spicy tech cards and stuff like that. But for this event, I was like, dude, it's NAIC, last event of the year, big event, and my last chance to make day 2 this season. I want a consistent deck. I want a deck that gets into the game and lets me do what I want. So, more so a player improvement type thing, I suppose, and not really anything on the list. Because my list did actually look a lot closer to Cyrus's when I originally drafted it a week before the event, but ended up cutting all the fluff for extra consistency. So as a player, think like coming away from like the tech cards and stuff, as somebody who normally is like, how many tech cards can I cram into this archetype? Coming away with a list that was just max consistency, I think is a good thing to highlight for a player such as myself. This is a little bit luck based, but I did get to go first most of the games. The die rolls were pretty favorable for your boy most of the weekend. And overall, like, if I went second, I generally had a pretty strong hand, either with the Squawkabilly EX or the Forest Sealstone, the VIP Pass, the Irida, the Luminian, or not a Luminian, sorry, I didn't play Luminian, but generally I got to go first most games, and the games I didn't, I had a pretty solid board state to afford going second, so pretty good stuff. And again, I just feel like I played really well overall, despite not making that day 2 finish, despite kind of falling off towards the later end of the day. Like I said, I think my play was pretty strong. I think I was making all the right plays. Just again, it was really the preparation that got me, or the lack thereof, to be more specific. The lack of preparation that really kind of was responsible for most of my losses this weekend. So it is what it is, but you gotta highlight the few things that go right. But that's it. That's my tournament report for the North America International Championships for 2023. This is my first season going full competitive, where I went to, I started at the beginning of the season with Baltimore, and I tried to hit as many regionals as I could throughout the year. So for my first full season of competing, it was a lot of fun. Pretty all right note to end on with NAIC. Like I said, didn't get that day 2 like I was hoping for, but it is what it is. It's still a pretty strong note to end on, I think. And since I'm talking about the season as a whole, be on the lookout, stay tuned, as I will have another video coming out with my season in review, where I kind of give y'all a brief walkthrough of every event I went to, the decks I played, and, the reasons behind all that fun stuff. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely stay tuned, check it out, maybe hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. And of course, don't forget to check out the podcast as well. Damage Counter Podcast. We're available on all major podcasting platforms. Spotify, Audible, Apple, Google, you name it, we're there. And if we're not, leave it in the comments below and I'll make sure we get our podcast there. We post episodes every 2 weeks on Thursday. We're basically your TCG variety show. We talk about the meta, we talk about tournaments, we talk about product, we talk about collecting, we talk about stories. We interview figureheads in the community and all that fun stuff. So check us out. Check out our socials. You can find me and Josh's Twitter at the top of the screen, the podcast's Twitter at the bottom of the screen. Thank you all for watching. Take it easy.